In part 3 of the Morality of Money series, we are going to discuss the subject of usury in relation to Bitcoin, or how usury is a morally dubious practice that I believe is, or that I will demonstrate is, not only widespread, but it is all pervasive within the current financial and socioeconomic system. And I believe that Bitcoin offers an alternative to usury and an opportunity to opt out of this practice. So, first, we need to define some terms because I think a lot of people do not understand the first thing about what we are actually talking about when we discuss usury. So, first of all, we're going to be looking at usury from a classical perspective. We're going to examine the subject from a moral perspective as interpreted by most people throughout history in many different cultures. So, historically speaking, traditionally, usury has been a practice that is either looked down upon or is just outright outlawed by various societies and cultures throughout history. This is a cross-cultural acknowledgement, a cross-cultural understanding that there is something fundamentally wrong about usury. So we're going to look at it from that perspective. Now, first, we must define what usury means. Critically, it must be established that usury does not mean the charging of interest. It is not a blanket prohibition against the charging of interest. The mere fact that interest is being accrued and paid from one party to another does not necessarily mean that usury is occurring. Okay? What usury has traditionally been defined as is a full recourse loan to a person. A full recourse loan to a person. What this boils down to is it is an uncollateralized loan to a person in which they are on the hook for the principal and interest. And because there is no collateral involved, what recourse does the lender have to recover the money? The only recourse in a full recourse loan is the human being themselves, their labor, which is which must be conducted in the future. Essentially, a full recourse loan is the person who is borrowing the money selling themselves into slavery, because now that person has to work in the future to pay off the principal and interest. They are, because there is no collateral, they have collateralized themselves. And that is a very morally dubious practice when you really think about it. You are, with full recourse loans, one person is selling themselves into essentially slavery. There is a portion of that person's labor in the future which has not yet been earned by them, which they now owe with interest to another person. Now, before we get into this any further, I can hear the rejections, especially from the libertarians already. But we are going to get into some of the nuance here and we're going to examine why this really is morally dubious. But it's worth noting that through most of human history, cross-culturally, this practice of full recourse, uncollateralized loans, where the person themselves, like, what does full recourse mean? It means that the lender has full recourse to recover the funds, to extract the capital back plus interest from the human being themselves. This, when you frame it from this perspective, it starts to sound a lot like a form of slavery, right? Let's look at an example which is acknowledged by most people as being a form of slavery, which we would reject, and that is indentured servitude. And what the history of indentured servitude was, you had people in Europe who wanted to come to America, but they could not afford to. So what they did, they sold themselves effectively into slavery. They had no recourse in terms of their personal autonomy. Once they entered into that contract, all of their labor was extracted until whenever their debt was paid off. And this, of course, is very dubious. This is not. If you really think about it, your natural instinct should be to question this. You know, is this really how we want to treat other human beings? Is allow them to sell themselves into effectively slavery in order to pay off a bond? You know, this is dubious. This is morally questionable, for sure, at the very least. It should be just rejected. It should not be something that is tolerated. To give a modern example, in what we see now, there is an indentured servitude now. There are women who effectively are sex slaves until they pay off whatever they owe to their handlers, and this is how they get into, let's say, Western Europe or into America. Well, we would not look at that situation and say that these are two parties freely consenting and entering into a contract. By entering into this, supposed contract, they're enslaving themselves in order to fulfill the bond, to pay off the bond. You're selling yourself into bondage. I don't know anyone who would say that this situation with a poor woman selling herself into effectively slavery, into the sex trade until she can pay off whatever she's supposedly owes to the handler. We would not say that this is morally acceptable. At least I wouldn't. I would question anyone who would say that that is acceptable. Why do we not only refuse to object to usury, as here defined, but we openly embrace it? It is an integral part of the financial system itself. Usury is embedded into it. It is, in many ways, the very foundation of it. Let's go back to the original definition. Usury indicating a non-collateralized full recourse loan. Essentially, a human selling themselves, their future labor, locking it into a bond. They're selling themselves into bondage, okay? And because there's no collateral to be seized, that the person is simply enslaving themselves. Because the only way to extract that or to collect the principal plus interest is from the labor themselves. This is slavery, right? Now, let's look at the situation with student loans. They're not even dischargeable. At least, in many countries in America, student debt is not dischargeable. So now there's no collateral being posted for a student loan. The student is agreeing to pay the principal and interest for an amount of money that is simply, for people starting out their lives, just astronomical in many cases. And there's no possibility of discharging the loan. You're selling yourself into slavery. You're selling yourself into bondage. You're creating a bond in which your own labor is the only way to generate the principal and interest. And the longer it takes for that bond to be paid off, the more the interest accumulates. These are perpetual bonds. These are not bonds that have this is not like a mortgage where after 25 years it's done, and the interest does not accumulate. With a student loan, you have a situation in which people are selling themselves into slavery with no hope of paying it off, and no hope of no legal possibility of even discharging it. Now, another point to cover is we probably have some libertarians listening to this, and I can hear them saying, whatever contract two consenting adults decide to enter into is legitimate. Okay, well, let's say that two consenting adults agree to a full recourse, non-collateralized loan. Okay, fine. Well, guess what? What if the person who borrowed the money in this situation decides not to pay it back? Well, you have the state that steps in to enforce the contract. A person cannot just walk away from a loan. They cannot just walk away from credit card debt, right? In one way or another, that contract is being enforced by the state. Now, yes, there is the path of bankruptcy, but bankruptcy is really just another way of enforcing and legitimizing usurious loans in the first place. The fact that an indentured servant had there was an end date to their bondage did not change the fact that it was bondage. The fact that there is recourse to the courts through bankruptcy does not change the fact that it is still a usurious contract. And of course, there does exist loans which there isn't even the possibility of bankruptcy. This is, when you look at it from this perspective, you can see why cultures historically, cross-culturally, have rejected usury. And when you see it from this perspective, it really is quite astounding just how usury has come to dominate our socio-economic system. It is dominated to such a degree that we don't even recognize the immorality of it anymore because it is so all-pervasive. So the alternative to a usurious loan, and this is why I mentioned at the beginning, usury does not indicate simply contracts in which the only recourse or the lender has full recourse by subjugating the future labor of a human being. There is forms of debt contracts that are not usurious, and one would be collateralized loans, where there is collateral behind the loan that is staked, and that the lender has recourse to claim if something goes wrong with the loan. A great example of this would be a mortgage. If you have a non-recourse mortgage, then what that means is if you stop paying or you default, the bank gets the underlying collateral and you walk away. You do not owe anything. You don't have to work to earn a dime to pay the bank. They have no recourse to go after you because they have seized the collateral. Now, under this system, a person is not being enslaved. There is an object. There is a non-human form of collateral that is being used in this contract, which can satisfy the lender in case of default. Now, that is an entirely different situation compared to the person themselves essentially selling themselves into bondage. They themselves become the collateral. Now, of course, that is not to say that mortgages as they exist in this financial system are moral just because they are not usurious, as we have defined. Because in the last episode, we explored how mortgages really work. They work through the rehypothecation of fiat currency, which is itself, because it is essentially conjured from nothing. So I'm not saying that mortgages in the financial system of today are moral because they're not usurious. There's a different kind of evil at work there. But it is to say that one of the first steps towards a fair and moral financial system is to loans need to have collateral, all loans, and that collateral cannot be a human being.